So thank you everyone for having me here. I'm just honored to be in the presence of all of you amazing engagement reporters and editors. My name is Sona Patel. I'm the Director of User-Generated Content and Community at the New York Times. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we took a human-centered approach to sourcing and how that really helped us shape one of the most important lines of coverage during the pandemic for us, which was how federal pandemic relief programs were faring among poor Americans. And before I even start, I just want to say I'm also here on behalf of my reporting colleague, Jason DeParle, our poverty reporter who is based in Washington, D.C. So we had two kind of primary objectives for this project that we were working on. In August of last year, Jason and I talked and collaborated, and he told me that, I'm really looking to kind of launch this coverage line of how who are the most, the people who are most affected by the pandemic, particularly people living below the poverty line and ones who are relying on federal aid programs. And he wanted to kind of tell these stories about how these programs are faring for those communities. So we talked about creating a diverse database of sources and story ideas that could really help us show this. But the repertorial challenge that we faced was that most of the poor Americans who are the focus of this coverage aren't part of the Times' core readership. And we know that, as many of you know, as we do a lot of work in the engagement section, that reporters often rely on intermediaries like social workers or advocacy groups to kind of connect us with people to interview, which sort of risks selection bias creeping into stories. Another important aspect of this whole project was we didn't have a story or stories in mind. Typically when we crowdsource at the Times, we are thinking about the story that we know the story that we want to write. We put out a call for sources, and then we kind of find people to interview, and then we write the stories. But for this, we wanted to take this approach where we wanted the readers to help us really shape the reporting and the stories that we could potentially tell. And our second main objective too was with this database to regularly follow up with the people we heard from as federal policies changed, as more stimulus checks were issued. And we wanted to figure out a way to kind of create that kind of database. So to help us reach the right people, we thought, why don't we publish a call out that we could circulate among intermediaries like administrators of social safety net programs or food banks to try to help or get them to try to help us circulate the call out among communities. So we created just a general, broader call out in which we had 6 categories, including childcare, unemployment, housing, and we asked specific questions in each category. We had a total of 14 questions, and they were all, of course, aimed at kind of low-income families. And we, the human-centered approach to this, creation of the call out was that we went to the intermediaries first to ask what kinds of questions they would suggest we asked. So Jason and I came up with an initial roster of questions based on the categories that we had in mind. And then we presented them to the intermediaries, so people across these different sections, people who worked in housing, advocates in food banks, for instance, and other community groups, and said, here are questions. What else should we be asking based on your experience? And this really proved to help. One very specific example of how it helped was one of the questions that we had under housing was, has the pandemic caused you to fall behind on your mortgage or rent? Have you experienced eviction or foreclosure? And are you in danger of doing so? And one of our partners, our intermediaries who we contacted, which was the Princeton's Eviction Lab, which is a team of researchers and students who research and publish eviction data, suggested an even better, more textured question for us, which was, did you try to negotiate with your landlord about rent during the pandemic? And if so, how did that conversation go? So we were able to kind of really rework and reshape our questions to focus on getting the strongest anecdotes and the kind of richer stories that were not things that we were initially thinking of when we put these questions together. So after we published the call out on our site, we asked the intermediaries to promote it again in community groups and among their connections. We looked at previous callouts that we had done on pandemic unemployment and other relevant callouts that we could maybe find people who we could reconnect with. And through those, like in the process of connecting with intermediaries to promote the callout, we stumbled upon a connection with Fresh EBT, which is a nonprofit group that is based in Brooklyn, and they are the creators of one of the largest and most popular food stamp management apps that has about 4 million users. So Fresh EBT worked with us to adapt our call out for their app. So the way it worked was when a user of the app opened it, they would get a prompt to open a survey, which had questions from our call out. And then at the end of the survey, an individual would, or the user would kind of opt into, they were asked if they wanted to connect with the New York Times or if they were willing to share their responses with the New York Times. So the questions that we selected from our call out, we collaborated with Fresh EBT on which ones would show up in the app. And the result of that partnership and the result of Fresh EBT promoting some of those questions in their app, in that questionnaire, was many, many diverse sources, really powerful anecdotes, and dozens of really great story ideas, which is, we felt very lucky. This was exactly what we were looking for. We wanted to just hear directly from people who are most affected. And we wanted, without us just asking very specific pointed questions as if we had stories in mind. So Fresh EBT ended up collecting more than 1,000 responses to the InApp survey. And about 60% of those folks agreed to share their contact information with Jason and with us. And Jason ended up following many of those respondents for weeks. He stayed in touch with them and talked to them as more, federal aid was announced and as people continued using these federal safety net programs. Fresh EBT also agreed to kind of re-promote the call out using different questions in the on-site form. So every couple of weeks, they were changing up the questions, which from the different categories, which will allow us to get some really additional powerful anecdotes and stories. So this is just a very small sampling of the results. Again, the stories that we heard from the people who responded to the survey just really added a lot of great nuance and texture and humanity to our reporting. And this is kind of how we were able to really take our reporting and go beyond the statistics of poverty during the pandemic. For instance, every piece about stimulus checks and other federal programs was really bolstered by these very human accounts. This is one of the most powerful anecdotes that we got from someone who responded to the Fresh EBT survey, a woman who tried to sell her eggs to a fertility clinic but did not medically qualify. Another really great anecdote, a very sad and tragic one, was a man who sold his father's Rolex watch, the only memento and heirloom that he had, in order to get money to feed his family. We heard from a lot of our readers just in the comment sections, I think in news stories in which we are writing, again, just about the statistics and the results of these federal aid programs by the numbers, the comment sections tend to kind of get a little out of hand, and people are just reacting to kind of the government, like, bureaucracy and getting into that in the comments. But these stories really kind of helped people connect with the subjects of the articles. One woman said that one of the sources, or one of the sources of her stories, her story resonated with the commenter very strongly. Another said these stories really cut through the political rhetoric to show how badly our systems fail those who face challenges greater that they can handle alone. So what did we learn from this reporting project? Many of the lessons we learned were actually outlined in a really excellent article in Columbia Journalism Review that was published earlier this year, called "The Problem of Casting Calls for Sources." The article is written from the perspective of a community advocate who often gets calls from journalists after a breaking news situation. For instance, she talked about how, during the pandemic, she would get calls from reporters saying, "I want to talk to a, Black single mother with 2 children who is struggling to make rent," or "I want to talk to a single mother who recently lost her job and is, unable to like find new employment." And it's usually, reporters who are looking for sources immediately after a news event. And in this partnership with FreshEBT, it really kind of helped us avoid focusing on finding extremes. We were also really able to kind of slow down, build relationships with the people we wanted to talk to, whose stories we wanted to tell before deadline. And that allowed us, again, to really center humanity in our reporting and in the storytelling generally. We learned that the human-centered design approach to this particular line of coverage and this type of crowdsourcing really was the right way to go. Brainstorming with intermediaries helped us really challenge our own assumptions and just simply ask better questions. This project too wasn't just to find sources. We wanted to really change the way that we wrote stories about poverty. There's a really great example and a quote in that CJR article that says, quote, "Journalists miss a lot of stuff in the middle, stories where multiple conflicting things can be true at once," which is so true. We, sometimes we are, again, looking for that one powerful quote or that one powerful story, extreme story that we can tell, but we sometimes fail to acknowledge that there can be multiple things happening in people's lives, not just bad, not just good. And this type of collaboration with FreshEBT and the people who were who responded to the InApp questionnaire really kind of helped us see more than we thought we could even get. And so we were able to just tell more complete stories that way. And then finally, evaluating sources early and often. When Jason and I collaborated last year, well before he was on any sort of deadline or anything, we thought about what types of stories he wanted to tell. And I talked to him a lot about, what is it like, what's the cadence of stories, and are they just stories, or do you want to tell more visual stories? And in all of the reporting that he did, some were straight text articles, others had really powerful videos and photos. And it was good to be able to kind of plan for the types of content, the types of storytelling that we wanted to do. We also really continually evaluated our partnership with FreshEBT and worked with them to continually re-promote the call out. So that was particularly helpful. This is also all to say that this project has really kind of jump-started the way in which we are approaching crowdsourcing from here on out. I learned that, the one-off call-outs that we are all used to doing are not really going to help us build relationships and connections with audiences in different kind of in the different storylines that we are trying to approach. And so this has really helped us think about how we want to potentially build a database of diverse sources that we can share more widely with the newsroom, and a database of people that we can just routinely, again, get in touch with as our storytelling needs change and as different storylines come up, and just to kind of stay connected with people to see how their stories are changing as well. And then here are just a couple of points for further reading. We actually wrote about Fresh EBT in 2018 and what their approach was to fighting poverty, and how they wanted to kind of reframe the whole conversation about poverty and the tools and resources available to people living below the poverty line. And I bring this article up too because I've learned too that doing this type of research and finding out what organizations and groups are out there that we could potentially connect and partner with is such an important part of the storytelling. And then the other link is to that really excellent CJR article that I highly recommend everyone read. I now even reference this too when I'm thinking about projects. I think it was just an excellent resource for people, for us in the engagement space, as we are thinking about how we connect with people and what does it mean to do a casting call for sources, and how can we avoid that as well.